Welcome to Parenthood Bites, the podcast where we explore life as a parent in tech. I'm your host, Chow, and I have over 15 years of experience in tech, and I'm also currently working as a career coach. I'm the proud mother of 3 incredible boys. In each episode, we have an inspiring guest who will share their remarkable story. You'll find their wisdom and insights both relatable and enriching, because after all, we're all in this parenting journey together. So grab your favorite drink, get cozy, and let's dive into today's episode. Hi everyone, welcome to episode 42 of Parenthood Bites. We're here today with Tali Gutman, who is a staff software engineer and currently located in Colorado. Hi Tali, how are you today?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I know we're recording this early in the week. How was your weekend?
Between us parents, survival.
Yes. I find that when I go back like on Monday, it's like, oh man, work, but also like, oh,
Yeah, this
it's
is where I
calm.
rest. Yeah, exactly. I like every time somebody tells me like, "Oh, did you have a relaxing long weekend?" I'm like, "You clearly don't have kids."
Yes, especially vacations, right? They're like, oh, how was your vacation? Do you feel refreshed? I'm like, no, I need like a day or two after to kind of recover from all of
Yes.
that.
Yes.
Life of parents, right? So, I like to start with how many kids do you have and what are their ages?
Sure. So I have 2 kids. Ethan is a little over 4 years old. He was born on January 1st, 2020. That was a fun year.
Wow.
And Ella just turned 2.
Those are such fun ages. I know it's also a lot of work, but it's like,
Exhausting.
yeah, very exhausting, but also very fun.
How old are yours?
Mine are 13, 12, and 8. So when I look at, younger kids, I'm like,
Eh,
oh, it was tiring, but also that was when they wanted me around. And, you could pinch them and,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they would come to you just with a smile all the time.
yeah,
Not that they're
yeah,
not happy to see me. I think they are, but, sometimes
yeah,
they want their own space and
yeah.
their friends and things like that. Yeah. So you said your son was born on the 1st of 2020.
January 2020.
What was that like?
I mean, I think, when you're in labor room, you don't give a rat's ass on what's the date.
Yes.
But the real kicker there was like I had whatever a few months of normal new mom with a baby, and then the pandemic hit and everything was like we were living in Brooklyn at the time in a 60-story building, and going to the elevator was an exercise of anxiety, and going outside was an exercise in anxiety. And we're like, we have this baby we need to keep alive. And now the whole world like went up in flames. So it was a very stressful time. And I think, to kind of the topic at hand, I would say we were fortunate to have both been working in tech, because it offered some flexibilities that I think a lot of people did not have in that setting. But feeling like being grateful for the fortune of working in tech at that time was drowned by so much stuff. And so yeah, it was a rough time, like to anybody who had like their first, and or in general a baby, kind of with the pandemic catching them by surprise.
And then like after the baby's born, you have like the month checkup and then those follow-ups, right?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Yeah, so for him, I think it's sort of the worst of it was comfortably in between, I think. The sort of his 3 months checkup. So like the pediatrician was a walking distance, so it wasn't, at least we didn't need to take him on the subway for the pediatrician, which was a big deal. And women's health is like, oh yeah, we checked you up in 6 weeks. You're golden. See ya. so so I was in need of traveling anywhere for that. He sort of, I think, had his 3 month checkup kind of before it got really bad. And by the time it was time for his 6 month checkup, like there was a bit of a lull, and we ran away from New York to my in laws in California. So he got his 6 month checkup over there. And it was still, stressful and whatnot, but it wasn't like big city, crowded, stressful. It was like, okay, there's a pandemic raging. y'all are sick, everybody's sick. But yeah,
It was like the pandemic stress, but not the added stress of like the whole city, all of that going on.
the like additional risk of like just everything, everything being so close together, and everything in the city is so based on like subway traffic and walking the streets. And I remember we laughed bitterly about the like, oh, we need to keep like 6 feet apart. And it's like, there is no 6 feet in this sidewalk. I don't know how to do this. So there was a lot there.
Yeah, and I can imagine it's super scary too because you have this baby who doesn't have their immunity built yet. So you're kind of like, I don't want to keep him at home all day, but also where do you take him to?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So, just to dig into a little bit about working in tech, I was curious what brought you to a career in tech?
I was reflecting on that because I knew you'd ask. So I actually like I feel like growing up for a very long time didn't really have a computer. My best friend had a computer, and I would like spend a lot of time with him. And we would just play. We weren't like I don't remember ever asking myself how are these games built back then. That wasn't the thing for me, at least.
Me too. I just played.
But then, like, so I was a kid in the 90s, and then the internet came in, and then there was like, oh, you can build websites with HTML. And I'm like, okay. But I also had, I think, a classmate that like did this class and whatever, and he taught us some stuff. But then it sort of was like, wait, but this website has this thing. And I started like copy pasting JavaScript. And then after copy pasting JavaScript, I was like, well, but I want to change it just a little bit to do something slightly different. And so you start tinkering, and in tinkering, you start understanding a little bit more. And you're like, maybe I could just like write this thing from scratch. And I just kind of, I don't know, I was drawn to computers, but not always in quite the same way. And then when I was 14, I decided it's like I was raised by a single mom, and she was a teacher. Money was not a thing we had. It's just that. So when I was 14, I'm like, I want to get a job. I was living in Israel. That's a very different. I want to get a job. I think it's technically legal at 14 over there, or at least it was back then. And I found a job posting for a local computer store.
Nice.
And I'm like, okay. So I called them up, and you can imagine, like, I sound like a 14-year-old girl because I am a 14-year-old girl. I like talked to this guy. I'm like, I was calling about this job. And to his credit, he was like, didn't say, you sound like a 14-year-old girl. He was like, all right, why don't you come in for an interview?
Oh, wow.
Did you ever install a computer from scratch? And I'm like, no, but I can read English, so I'm sure I can do it. And so,
Wow.
and so I walk in there and I install a computer from scratch the first time in my life in this job interview by reading everything.
Wow.
And in the end of the day, he goes like, well, I mean, you did a good job, but you did it super slow because you were reading everything.
That was your first time.
But yes, but and he was like, but it was good. It was good to meet you, and good luck. And maybe a few months later, I went back to the store to just buy something, and he like remembered me, and he was like, "Oh, how are you doing?" Blah blah blah. We just kept talking. Long story short, that summer I worked for the store building their website, which was not like any e-commerce. It was just like old school, just like a page with stuff and information in it. But during that time, he got me like to understand how to work with the physical stuff. He's like, "Oh, Talia, like, can you do this for me? Can you assemble this? Can you?" And so, like, I was doing this other job, but it was very clear that, whatever. I'm interested in stuff. He just threw me in the deep end, like, on all of these things.
He just threw whatever he needed.
Whatever he needed, he was like, just do it. I was paid by the hour. I didn't care. Like,
Yeah.
and I really loved it. It was really fun. And I think I like years and years and years later, I had the pleasure of walking the data center floor in a Google data center and like assembling, disassembling stuff there. And I like sent him a message, and I'm like, yo, you know, you taught me everything in this area, just so you'd know. And
Aww.
this is where I am now. So it was cool. It was a very different vein, and but it was fun. And I guess over time, I took like comp sci in high school. I learned how to program in Pascal, I think, and then onwards to university. Like at that point, the course was set.
Right. So like you knew that's what you wanted to do.
I mean, other than the part where I like later on decided that maybe it's not for me and I should try something else. But I went back. So,
When did you decide that? Because like for me, a part of college, I was like, oh, I don't know if this is for me. And then eventually I still stuck with it. So when was it that you felt like it wasn't for you?
it pulls in a lot of context. So as I said, born and raised in Israel. So the beginning of my degree in university was part of a military program. And I think that military program, I mean, I know this at this point, but it was very bad for me. Like it wasn't a good place for me. And it was, it's like an ROTC program, right? But everything has its own kind of details and specifics. And so I was going through that program and studying comp sci and physics and math, which was that program.
That's a lot.
That was a lot. And so I think just being in a place that was really bad for me kind of tarnished everything. And so when I left the program eventually to just like finish my military service somewhere else, which was programming, by the way, I was programming for the rest of my military service. But I wanted out of that program. And so when I left the program, I sort of questioned everything. I was like, this was so bad. Why was this so bad? Maybe just this comp sci isn't for me. And I sat and thought about it for many hours. And ultimately, I was like, I know what I'll do. I'll try architecture school. But I'm a pragmatist who comes from a pragmatic family. So I first went back to finish my comp sci degree. And only then did I go to architecture school, which was probably smart given that I quit architecture after a year and 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think we were talking before this recording. I had another podcast episode
Yeah.
with someone who switched from architecture to computer
Yeah.
science.
So switched over and back for me. But it was interesting. It gave me some perspective.
Yeah, I bet. It was like going to something else, then you realize, like, oh, computer science is probably better for me. So, how many years were you working in tech before you became a parent?
Do you want to count it since that job at 14? Yeah, it was probably about 20 years. Let's call it give or take 20 years.
Yeah, about
Different
20
flavors of
years.
working in tech for 20 years.
Yeah, sounds about right. So, what was the parental leave like when you had your first son in 2020 and then when you had your daughter later on?
So when I had Ethan, we were both working at Google, and many things I could say about Google, but their parental leave was so it was whatever it was back then. I don't remember the details. They have updated it since then, and it's actually better now. But yeah, I had like a month before the due date. And then there was a lot of like branches because it was different depending on if you had like a normal delivery or a C-section, like sort of all of the branches. But all told, I think I was off for about 6 months or close to that, all things considered.
Yeah, that's pretty great. And so, your husband, did he also get 6 months?
Back then, he only had three. It was an interesting thing because, like many dads, there was this plan of like, I'm going to take a month off and then I'm going to take the rest of the time off later when the kid's older, blah, blah, blah. But because of the pandemic, we've learned that you can't work with an infant in the house. That just doesn't actually function, really, most of the time. I remember he was having a real hard time kind of making ends meet. And eventually, I was like, you know what? This is a matter of like setting expectations. Take the rest of your leave, stop it. And so he did, and everything. I mean, we didn't completely calm down because there was still the pandemic, but at least it was it was a market improvement to trying to juggle it all. And so when Ella was born, we basically had essentially the same leave because I switched over to Datadog where I work now. He is still at Google, and we basically both had 4 months. So this time he took 3 months and then took the extra month later. But that made for a very chill sort of, especially with like a second child. You're not like it was May of 22, so the pandemic was we're kind of over it at that point. And second child, we were so much more chill, and and like the older kid was just going to daycare, and so it was like just a lot of chill time. It was very different.
Yeah, because the first one you just don't know. You're just afraid, like, what's gonna happen? The second one, it's like, okay, they're resilient. It's fine.
Yeah,
By the time I had my third, it's like, oh, go nuts.
yeah. I salute you for that one. I'm like, we're like, we like our man to man defense. I don't know if we can go to zone.
Yeah. And when you get outnumbered, it's something
Yeah,
different.
yeah.
So after your leave, what was it like transitioning back to work?
So the first time around was an unmitigated disaster for a large swath of factors, some of them out of anybody's control. The first time around, I took up a management job right before I went on leave. And you might imagine when I came back, it was a very different job. It's like we went from being in office to being remote. I didn't used to have an infant in the house. Now I did. This whole pandemic thing was like, I have things that I worry about. The people who reported to me had things that they worried about. But the amount of like, I very quickly realized I do not have the emotional capacity to do this job under these conditions right now. It's like, no. So that was rough, but was sort of the catalyst for me just finding another job and changing the situation for myself in many ways. With the second kid, it was very different in many ways. I think I would say I'm just more chill in my current position than I was before. So that contributed, but also we got a project, like it was kind of timing wise, got a project to a point where it was like, okay, it's out and it's just maintenance. And I'd already told my reporting chain, hey, listen, like I wanted to switch to doing something else. I wanted to switch to doing something new a few months before I delivered. But there were circumstances like the manager left, all those things. I'm like, all right, I'll fill in, I'll stick around, whatever. So I essentially left with like, I'm leaving for 4 months. I don't want to come back to this project. So think about what I want, like what I should be doing for you. Like, how could I be the most use for you when I come back? But of course, I'm a staff engineer, so nobody thought about that. And I came back and they're like, oh, what do you want to do? So I'm like, I guess I'm going to have to figure out what problems you have today because they're probably different from the problems you had 4 months ago. Not that different, though, turns out, but somewhat different. And so it was very much on me to chart my path and figure out what I wanted to do. And it was a little stressful. I would say I'd prefer that over the like the world's on fire and all of your reports, are trying to figure out what to do with their lives now, sort of thing. Definitely, definitely better than that. But there's something to be said about having a project to come back to, having like a setup that sort of, or you have at least some background on like, okay, maybe some things will have changed in this time, but it doesn't really change that much, let's be honest. And so it wasn't a bad experience, but it was a little the general like mom brain. I was gone for 4 months. They're all going to find out I'm an imposter. The usual, but on steroids a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're being asked to like figure out what the problems are and do all of that, it's like you're kind of starting from scratch again to
Mm,
refigure everything out. Like
yeah.
you said, of course, way better than the first time around in that situation, because not only stepping into a management role, that's already a whole different role, but like with the pandemic, like for any manager, no matter how seasoned, with the pandemic in the mix, that added a whole nother level of complexity. That's a lot to come back to.
Yeah.
So, what do you do for childcare with your kids of 2 and 4?
They go to daycare. We're very fortunate to have found this particular one. Got a little lucky. We always joke that they make us look like better parents than we actually are. But yeah, so right now it's relatively simple. We drop them off in the same place. We pick them up in the same place, all at the same time.
That's great.
But the older kid has one more year. And then once that year is done, we're going to have to figure out, like now we're like, oh, I guess we're going to have to figure out which elementary school to send him to. What's that going to look like on our daily routine? But that's a next year problem. No, I mean, it's coming up to try answering these questions and doing research, but we don't need to quite deal with it just yet. And not in this very moment.
So when he goes to elementary, is that like part of the day, and then the other part you have to send him to like daycare or something, or preschool, or?
I mean, we're going to have to figure out like aftercare. We live in Boulder and it has benefits because apparently the school system here is pretty has a lot of resources. But I have like neighbors with older kids and stuff. I got to get a little bit of information. So some schools have aftercare, but there's like a lottery. So I don't know. I really am not sure yet. I'm still wrapping my head around sort of like my kids will grow up very differently than I did. Like I was a latchkey kid and my elementary school was in the same block, literally, that my family's apartment was on. Since I went to school, I walked to school by myself and walked home by myself and ended up in an apartment. Like it wasn't empty. It's like a longer story, but largely I was way more independent. And here, there's more roads, there's more distance. I feel like it's less common to sort of have that kind of experience where like, all right, kiddo, just walk yourself to school. At this age, certainly. So yeah, I'm not sure what it's going to be, but we're very excited about the kids getting more independent because I think we liked their independence, thought it was good, and wondering how that would fly with like child protective services and things.
I tell you though, when they get older and they can do things on their own, especially when the youngest one can also do things on their own, you're like,
Yeah, you're out
"Whoa,
of the trench.
this is amazing."
Yeah.
They just went to the bathroom. I didn't have to go wipe.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
didn't have to
yeah.
wipe their butt. Like, what? What is that? It's a whole new adjustment. But yeah. So, how has your work life changed since you became a parent?
It's a good question. I think it came about in a bit of phases, right? The like pandemic phase was very much a you think you got trouble, you don't have trouble. I had just so little to give. I'm like, I don't care. I don't care about any of this. I don't care about any of you. I don't care about these projects. I don't care about any of these things. But that subsided and it was very specifically circumstantial. I think I've gotten, in some ways, more compassionate and in some ways less patient. And it's sort of weird to look at it and say, like, no, these two things kind of happened together. But it's more like there are things that I do as a parent. I do not want to do them at work. I used to be okay with that, but I'm not anymore. And then on the other hand, I have like more capacity, more patience and understanding if I'm doing like one-on-one mentoring to anybody or just like, just working with someone. I am way better. And the bar may have been low, just putting it out there, but I'm way better at not getting annoyed at things just and being more like kind of from the experience. And I know it sounds, sometimes people are like, oh, like that's terrible to say, but it's true. It's like you go through parenting and you are like, you can't do everything for them. You need to let them learn, and they will do things not the best way, certainly not the way you do it. Lo and behold, that happens at work too, and you need to let go. And so I think by hook or by crook, I have gotten better at that part. I was like, this is how it's going to be. And it's adults, so maybe like, okay, you say what you have to say, or like, oh, I don't think that's the best way, or like maybe you should consider this other thing. But ultimately, yeah,
Right. You let them do it. Go for it. I think that makes a lot of sense. Especially like I think in the past it might have been like, "Hey, let me just do that real quick for you." But now it's like, "No, you try it."
yeah.
And I'll be here to support you if you need it, but ultimately you try it on your own. So what has it been your biggest struggle or challenge being a parent in tech?
I don't think it has. Like, I think there's struggles being a parent. I don't know that they are specific to being in tech at all. If anything, I think comparing, it just has to be said, like we are privileged in many ways. The work that we do, knock on wood, pays well. We get to do it in all sorts of like here, we are both, we're working from home or we're working from wherever. I oftentimes ask myself, like, how did my mother do this? On her own, working 3 jobs, I don't know.
Yeah, and not remotely either, right? Like she had to physically be there.
And yeah, no. She had to she had to physically be there. She was teaching. She was a teacher. So from that perspective, I'm like, whatever challenges I've got, it's like that's not part of it. And so I think, the challenges mostly are sort of, I guess it's a question of how broadly you want to phrase it, but the world is broken. We brought kids into a broken world, and we grew up in a broken world. I want to say, depending on the bubbles you look at, sometimes you can kind of squint and think that it's getting better. It's a little bit of like one step forward, two steps back on the whole. And so I think our bigger challenges are asking ourselves these questions of like, how do we raise them? How do we make sure that our boy becomes a good man? How do we make sure that our girl becomes a fierce woman that nobody could put down? Like, how do we correct for the brokenness of society in the little microcosm of like the two little people that we care about right now? And it's tough. And society is what society is. You can't protect them. You need to kind of figure out how to help them deal with it. And my 4-year-old came back one day and said, "Oh, like, this kid," he often comes back, it's like, "Oh, this kid said that I'm whatever, insert here." I'm like, what do you care what they say? But it's so difficult to convey that to a 4-year-old. This is a lifetime of like us kind of negotiating with society whatever they said to us and what we took from that, whether we let it sink in or we shed it off as irrelevant. It was judgment calls the whole way. Like, I am just stomped with what do I do? And I guess, I don't know, I think our parents' generation just let us fend for ourselves or something.
You just figure it out.
But then again, when you look at the people that are in our sort of generation, that didn't work out for everybody, did it now? So I don't know. I feel like this responsibility of, and we have less control or less influence than we'd like to believe we do, probably, but it's still tough, and you still feel like you're responsible.
Yeah, especially as they go to school. Like you said, coming back from school, saying certain things, getting exposed to more and more, especially when my kids are going to middle school. I was like,
Oh God, it's
you
terrifying
want to
to me.
protect, yeah. And it's like, we can't keep them in that bubble forever because they're going to go out and they're going to get exposed to these things. So, how do we help them navigate through all the different challenges and different things they get exposed to? And whatever we tell them, we came to this conclusion from our experiences. But how do you help them have those experiences, but also learn those things? So it definitely is a struggle as they get older. I feel like it's less about keeping them physically safe, more
Yeah,
about helping them navigate
be
through all of these
resilient
things.
mentally and sort of understand who they are. I think I was a tomboy that did not fly very well in the environment that I was raised in, and it is not clear where I drew the, like, part of it was probably my older sister, but like it's not clear where I drew the, you know what, I'm just gonna be me, and I don't know why you have issues with this, but I've seen so many people that change who they are for whatever, call it better societal acceptance in a small myopic environment, and I just want my kids to know that they should be who they are.
Right.
And whoever that is, I will like, I want you to have the sort of, I don't know, the resolve to be true to yourself and not give up pieces for, but it's tough. I have no answers, only questions from here until infinity.
Yeah. And like you said, we figured things out at some point, but at least for me, it's not like I spent time talking to my parents about these things. You don't, you just deal with it. And so I try to tell my kids too. I'm like, hey, I'm here if you want to talk about any of these things. Like, you do you, and I'll be here to talk and support. But I don't know. It's a little bit different than what I grew up with. So
Mhm.
hopefully they see it. And, we're in that generation where we want to talk more about these things. And
Yeah.
hopefully they will open up.
Fingers crossed.
Exactly. Fingers crossed. So, at your kids' current ages of 2 and 4, is there anything that you struggle with specifically at those current ages?
Well, think with the 4-year-old, the weirdest thing is that he's moody. It's like he has good days and bad days. On good days, he's just like the most adorable kid and he's like helpful and he's kind. When he has bad days, it's all tantrums and you don't even know how to react because it's not sort of, we know that he is capable because yesterday it was a completely different story, but today is today. So this is what you get today. And so trying to sort of navigate that and working out, like, sort of, on one hand trying to understand why this happens, and also to sort of try to like help him deal with it himself, right? Like, it's like, you're 4, you're not a baby anymore. Like, you do know how to solve your own problems even if you don't feel like it right now. But on the other hand, there's also like, you sort of want to say it is okay, even as you grow older, to occasionally want the kind of treatment you had when you were younger, right? Like, I think, based on like my own experience, I'm like, I will read to you at bedtime, even when you can read for yourself if you want me to. Because my mom was like, well, you can read, go read. It's like, no, but I want that time. And so trying to kind of balance, how do you communicate? Like, you will always have this if you want it, but you also need to grow up. So that one's tough. With the younger one, she is fiercely independent and she looks at her brother and she wants everything that he can do. So the conversation goes like this: Ella, you can't ride your bike on the road. She's like, I want to ride on the road. It's like, no, you can cross the road with mommy and daddy here. You can't ride on the road. And she doesn't exactly have the words, but you can see that she's thinking, but you let Ethan ride on the road. It's like, Ella, we've trained Ethan for years how to safely ride on the road, but also it's always when we're there. It's like, and we choose those roads very particularly. Like, ain't nobody riding bikes on a freeway.
Right.
But
Yeah, yeah.
it's hard because I don't want to tell her you can't. You can do anything, just not right now. Not right at this moment.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit challenging and she picks up every single verbal tick from him.
She's watching, right? Every movement, everything.
Oh yeah. And so this morning, just like that out of nowhere, I hate you, Ethan.
Oh.
I was like, Ethan didn't have that word in his vocabulary at 2 years old, but she does. Doesn't mean that she knows exactly what it means. Doesn't mean that he knows exactly what it means, but it doesn't matter because they say it all the time where you're like, ah.
Yeah, yeah. It feels like the younger one's growing up faster because they're picking things up from the older one, right?
Yeah. A little bit. Yeah.
Definitely. I was like that when I was little too, Like if my brother had a full piece of steak, I wanted a full piece of steak. It didn't matter if I couldn't finish it. That was what I wanted. So, I think this is something we're all working through, but what works for you for a work-life balance? What is sort of your approach for that?
Well, this isn't an advertisement. It's literally the feature I like the best about my phone. I have an Android phone. Android phones have like a work profile as a separate thing.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I can just turn it off, and that's exactly what I do. When the workday starts, I turn it on. When the workday ends, I turn it off. That takes away Slack, email, all of the things that are work related. Poof.
Wow.
And so I walk away from my computer. I turn the thing off on my phone.
It's gone.
I'm out. Yes. It is mechanical. And sometimes I'm sure you and many of your listeners probably know this. Especially because my partner and I are both in the same field. A lot of the times you go through, like, okay, you pick up the kids, you do dinner. Over dinner, you have child conversations, not adult conversations. And eventually they're in bed and you're exhausted. But if there's something that's troubling you, you might talk about it, right? And so sometimes it bleeds over but I think it's sort of, that's just how that's how we've been our entire relationship, right? Like, we talk about work among other things. And so sometimes, I guess I think one of the things that I've realized over time is that there is no right and wrong with work life balance. There's your right, and when I was like young and unattached and working in Tel Aviv at Google, where like the headquarters is in Mountain View and there's like a 10-hour difference, right? My version of work life balance is I take off work at 5, I go climbing, and then at 8 p.m. or 8:30 p.m., I take a shower and then I get back to it for a few hours. And it was fine because I could do it. Like, there was nothing else vying on my time. If I didn't feel like doing it, if I was like, oh, after climbing, I'm going to go out with my friends, nobody's going to come at me with it. Right. But if I had something of a hang up, like my head was focused on this problem, it was very sad to let go of it at 5 when I had to go because I scheduled climbing with a friend and I have to go. Then, like, fine. That's how I do my balance. So that's one thing. The other thing that I realized is that it is incredibly tied to how you feel and what your mental state is, and way less to hours. Like, nominally, the hours you put in. Bad times were bad. If I worked around toxic people, that eats up all of your hours. It takes into your sleep, it goes everywhere. And right now, say, if we're like looping back to like the parenting stuff, and I don't know if it's like related to parenting, to like becoming a parent, or just because I've had enough of this already. I have zero tolerance for that kind of shit. So like, if I have toxicity around me, I'm like, all right, it's been fun. See you.
Definitely. And I think it definitely is, as we grow in our careers, as we evolve and dealt with different people, right? Like, we're dealing with so much already. We don't have the threshold for any of that other stuff. And I think you're absolutely right. Work-life balance does evolve as your life changes, as things evolve. What works for you now may not have worked for you last year or next year. So it's
Yeah.
going to constantly
Mm-hmm.
evolve. So, I know we're almost out of time. The last thing I want to ask is sort of, what would you tell someone who's planning to have kids, or what's something you wish you knew before you became a parent?
I don't know. I think it's such an individual choice. I think I was 35 when we had Ethan. So I wasn't a spring chicken. Sort of had a good idea of what I'm doing. I remember having a conversation with my partner who was like, "You don't seem that excited." I'm like, "Well, this is my body that's going to be sacrificed on this altar, and I'm never getting it back." So I feel like there's a lot of things that when we are younger, we don't clock them as costs. The costs are coming. You can't avoid them. For some, it's less. For some, it's more. It depends on the kid you get. It depends on so many things that are all hard. But I think, I don't know if there was anything that I would say, like, oh, I wish I knew this. But I do think that it is probably, like, deciding to have kids is probably the most selfish thing you can ever do. And it results in a total abdication of self for like for a period.
Yeah.
And the biggest, or like one of the challenges I see, is like, you need to maintain yourself too. Like, I think my mother, with everything I've told you so far, was like, she had very little left. And when we grew up and left the house, I was really worried, like, what is she going to hold on to? And I also felt throughout my teenage years that I was at fault for her. Like, she sacrificed everything. It's my fault. And I don't want to put that on my kids, which means I need to find a way. We're talking about work balance. Life balance is also to say, like, I know that you want this right now, sweetie, but mommy needs her time. We have like a weekly date night, almost weekly. We have a regular babysitter, and every time the kids are like, oh, like, I don't want you to go. Like, I know you don't want me to go, but mommy and daddy, we need our own time.
Yeah.
And so trying to not let it slide in any direction is a tough one. And I think as people go in to make that step, they should think about, you can't have it all. You have to let some things go, but like, you have to find what is most important to you to preserve, and try to preserve it. And over time, I think you can attest. Me, not yet, but you maybe. You get more time back, and you can get back to more things.
Yes.
But you need to remember who you were in order to do that,
Yes.
or reinvent yourself, or whatever.
Absolutely. You get more of that time back. And in the beginning, I'm like, what do I even do at this time? And then you start to figure out, like, oh, these are the things that I loved before and
Hmm.
I still or I love something else,
Yeah.
but like
Yeah.
maintaining that identity, right? So you're still you. You're not just Ethan, Ella's mom. You're also you, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important. Thank you so much for sharing that and for sharing everything else. It was really great talking to you today. So thank you.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I hope you have a great rest of your week. Take care. Thank you so much for joining us today on Parenthood Bites. We hope you found our episode informative and entertaining. If you're a parent in the tech world or know someone who is, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us at chow@parenthoodbites.co, and we'll be thrilled to add your experiences to our interviews. That's chow, CHIAO, at parenthoodbites.co. And to our potential sponsors out there, if you're a business or know of one that would like to support and partner with our podcast, please don't hesitate to get in touch. You can also reach us at chow@parenthoodbites.co. Thank you once again for tuning in, and we wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Until next time, take care and stay curious.